The US government has disbanded Elon Musk's pet project, DOGE, that's Department of Government Efficiency. For those of us who understand their government, this is no surprise at all. The idea of government being efficient is laughable at best. So a government department designed to make government efficient had a losing battle from day one.
Am I interrupting something important?
Impossible. I work for the government.
The incentives behind government lead to inefficiency, but worse than that. If you take them out over a long enough time period with a fiat currency system, the incentives lead to hyperinflation. So this is why we buy gold and silver. What a time to be alive. So over the last week, we've seen the Office of Personnel Management Director Scott Cooper come out and say that doesn't exist when referring to DOGE. That was the big news article for the week, that DOGE officially no longer exists. And that means it's been disbanded 8 months ahead of its scheduled end in July of 2026. So DOGE's entire mission was to make the US government efficient again, to find inefficiencies within the government and to essentially get rid of them. Whilst that sounds fantastic on the face of it, and it's something that I could absolutely agree with, and it's something that would be impossible to argue with, it is also an impossible task. Why? Well, because the government has all sorts of checks and balances in place that prevent one person from making too many changes too quickly. Now, that's great in preserving a bureaucracy over generations and generations, but when it comes to making big sweeping changes and making things efficient again, it's a preventative measure. It stops DOGE from being able to do what its mission is, which is why I say that DOGE was given an impossible task from the onset. If we had no checks and balances in the US government and the president could come in and act like a complete dictator, then yes, we could potentially slash government spending in half and the DOGE could be absolutely everything that it was ever promised to be. But if you're expecting Donald Trump to come in and grab the problem of government efficiency by the throat, I think you might be a bit disappointed. But we do know there is one thing that he does like to grab.
Grab him by the pussy.
Now, in addition to the news around DOGE, we've also seen the DOGE counter be removed from the US debt clock. Now, for those who aren't aware of what the US debt clock is, you should absolutely check it out. We'll leave the link in the description below. Just having a quick look at the US debt clock, you can see that the US national debt, this is the federal government, is $38.3 trillion. Now, you can also see there that they have a US federal tax revenue of $5.2 trillion, but they have a US federal spending of $7 trillion. Now, that leaves a difference there of $1.7 trillion, which is their federal budget deficit. So they add that amount, $1.7 trillion, to the US national debt every year. Give it about a year and that US national debt will become 40 trillion from 38.3. So you can see that the national debt is going the wrong way. This whole train is going the wrong direction, ladies and gentlemen, and we cannot turn it around. Now, something else that's quite important there is the US federal debt to GDP ratio. So you can see that in 1960 it was about 52%. So that 52% number means that the US, its annual production, it was 52% of that in debt. Now you can see in 1980 that dropped down to 34%, which is much better. In 2000 we saw it come back up to 55%, which is not good. But now you can see that number has increased all the way through to 121%, guys. You compare it to Japan, it looks pretty good. Japan's at over 200% of its GDP in national debt. But this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what ends societies and civilizations. Now, these numbers might seem unimportant, just financial numbers that I'm throwing at you one after the other. US debt, GDP, federal spending, budget, it doesn't make any sense, but they're incredibly important, and I'll tell you why. There is literature out there that says when a country passes the 110% of its GDP in national debt, that eventually it will go into hyperinflation. The logic being there is that when the debt becomes unpayable, then eventually you have to default on the debt. Now, there's two ways to default on the debt. The first of which is an honest default, where we say, hey, we've got all of these government bonds outstanding. We don't have the federal tax revenue to pay them out. So everybody who has an outstanding bond, sorry, you're not going to get paid. That is the honest way to default on your debt. I don't think that's going to happen. The second way to default on your debt is the dishonest way of defaulting on your debt, where you have all of this debt denominated in US dollars, but you print US dollars. So instead of saying, hey guys, we don't have the tax revenue to pay back all of this debt, you simply print the dollars out of thin air to pay back the debt. That might sound better. You might think, oh, well, at least these people get paid the debt back, right? Well, they're getting paid the debt back in dollars that are losing their value incredibly quickly. Why? Because they're being printed out of thin air at an exceedingly fast rate. What is better? The honest default, where all bond losers lose all of their money, or the dishonest default, where the entire currency loses all of its value completely? Now, if you look back at history, I'd actually say that the first option is better, but again, we're not going to see that one. We're going to get the second option. That is why these numbers matter, is because these numbers tell us that we are past the point of no return. The US debt is not payable. There is no way that we can turn this train around. $40 trillion in debt by this time next year, there's no way you can pay that back, particularly in a world in which you add to that debt by $1.7 trillion every year. If we were to considerably cut US government spending, that would lead to a crash in the US economy. And if we were to considerably raise tax revenue by taxing the citizenry even more, that would also lead to a massive crash in the US economy. Now, something to consider as well is the interest paid on this debt. Now, on the US debt clock, you can see the interest on the debt net is sitting at $968 billion per year. So the US government pays almost $1 trillion a year just in interest on this debt. Now, let's just say that the interest rates at the moment are, say, 4.5%, 5%. Well, 5% of $40 trillion is, for those playing at home, $2 trillion. That's $2 trillion every year in interest payments. Now, keep in mind, guys, we're paying $1 trillion at the moment. That would double the interest payments, which would also increase the federal budget deficit by another $1 trillion, making that a $2.7 trillion deficit per year. Do you see how this is a self-fulfilling prophecy? A spiral where you have so much debt, you can't pay it back, so you borrow more, and then your interest payments go up, so you can't pay it back, so you borrow more, and the spiral continues and continues and continues until we get to where we are now, where it's past the point of no return. We can't increase tax revenues to outstrip spending. We can't cut spending because otherwise we just have a massive economic collapse. And all we can really do is print the deficit out of thin air and watch inflation rip to the upside. Not a great place to be. That's what it is. I don't make the rules. I don't print the money. I don't rack up the debt. I don't change the taxes. I have no political power, nor would I really want it, to be frankly honest. All that we can do as investors is make good choices, make the right decision, position ourselves in the right assets to benefit from what's going on around us and to benefit from the scenario, from the cards that we're dealt. So, how do you protect yourself from a currency collapse? How do you protect yourself from a scenario like this? You buy gold and silver, assets that have been money for 5,000 years, assets that are the best performing assets during a hyperinflation, full stop. The last time we saw hyperinflation in a Western country was 1923 in Weimar Germany. So what did that look like? People were burning money to stay warm. It was cheaper to burn banknotes than it was to burn firewood. People were wallpapering their rooms with money. People were taking wheelbarrows of cash to the grocery store and leaving the cash and taking the wheelbarrows because the wheelbarrow was worth something and the cash was not. At the peak of the Weimar hyperinflation, people were sweeping banknotes into the street gutters because they were completely worthless. Hyperinflation has not happened in the West for over 100 years, which is why culturally we've completely forgotten about it. And that is one of the reasons why I think that we're going straight into it. So if looking at the US debt clock is not enough to convince you of the inflation thesis, let me show you some infographics. So I'm pulling up some infographics from a website called democracy.info. What we can see here, this infographic here, is the economic stimulus by the Federal Reserve in 2020. So what you can see here, it starts off at $100 US, we've got $10,000, we've got $1 million, we've got $100 million with that couch of cash. The couch is made from $46.7 million of $100 bills. Here you can see $1 billion in cash, and down at the bottom, you can see this is how much that the Federal Reserve printed every day in 2020. That is $27 billion a day. Whilst you were locked down at home watching Tiger King and doing all sorts of fun stuff to keep your brain amused, these guys were out printing. No days off. They weren't locked at home, they were busy, standing next to the money printer, getting it going. $27 billion a day. You can see those bulldozers there, pushing the cash into the hole. That is an insane amount of currency creation, everybody. So when people ask me, Sam, why is gold up and why is silver up so much over the last 5 years? Well, let me respond with another question. Why is inflation so bad over the last 5 years? Why is it that a trip to Woolies costs you twice as much as what it used to? Is it because the price of wheat has skyrocketed, or is it because the price of milk has skyrocketed? Yes, but is that really because the milk's more valuable? Is it because the wheat is more valuable? Or is it because the dollar is less valuable? Well, how can the dollar get less valuable, Sam? By printing boatloads of it out of thin air and then handing it out willy-nilly to whoever wants it. Job seeker, job keeper, job this, job that. Oh, handouts for COVID, handouts for this, handouts for that. Everybody gets 10 grand. Whoa! That's all well and good. Well, it happens. It's fantastic. You'd be silly not to enjoy it. But eventually the piper needs to be paid. The bill comes due. And that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. We've seen inflation absolutely rip to the upside. I understand the cost of living crisis going on at the moment in this country. I really feel for the average Australian out there. It is not fun to live through a massive cost of living crisis. Look, I grew up in the Northern Territory. I'm from Darwin. And for anybody that's been there, you'll see what I'm saying. Darwin is not a very wealthy place. I don't come from a wealthy family. I truly understand how the cost of living can really bite those at the lowest end of the economic spectrum. What I've made it my life mission to do is to educate my fellow Australians, my fellow man and woman, how to protect themselves from the money printer, how to protect themselves from $27 billion a day in currency creation. And the answer is, long story short, buy gold, buy silver. These have been money for 5,000 years, and these are the assets that perform the best in periods of high inflation and hyperinflation. Now, if what I've said isn't enough to convince you that the system is broken, that the numbers are outlandish, that the situation is untenable, then let me hit you with a few more numbers. The amount of time it took for you to watch this video, the US debt increased by $52 million. Now, after you buy your gold and silver, you get rid of your dirty, worthless fiat currency and you get real money. That's when you get to say, what a time to be alive.